Thanks, Ep. We're going to start out following on Steve's great presentation this morning. We'll be on the optimistic side about opportunities. Yes, I'm Aaron Adams. I'm the Director of Science of Bonefish Tarpon Trust. So I'll start out talking about Bonefish Tarpon Trust. It was founded in 1998 by recreational fishers and guides in South Florida, the Florida Keys, who were concerned about declines in the bonefish and tarpon fisheries. And so they decided to get together and essentially form their version of Trout Unlimited. But they pretty quickly learned that we didn't know anything about the science and biology of bonefish and tarpon. So we've become a science-based conservation organization focusing on the flats fishery. For those that don't know it, in the lower left, that's bonefish, tarpon, and then permit. Those are our main three. But because we work on flats fisheries in general in our part of the world, numerous other species have kind of come into our fold in different fishing groups as well, fishers, I should say. The nice thing from a completely marine science perspective, even if you don't fish, is that these species are great for conservation because of their economic and cultural value. And I'll talk about some specifics on that in a bit. The other nice thing from that conservation perspective is we don't have competing interests from, say, commercial fisheries, like we might do with snappers and groupers. So it's a good testing ground for us to figure out different approaches to address what we think are the main concerns. And in our part of the world, at this point for these species, our main concerns are about habitat, water quality, those types of things. The nice thing about the habitat conservation approach, again, is that if we protect, let's say, tarpon habitats, in the terrestrial world, tarpon might be considered an umbrella species. So by protecting tarpon, there's a whole suite, a whole community of other organisms that are also protected. So it's much broader conservation benefits. So where we work, the solid yellow lines, you can see Florida there in the middle, which is where we're headquartered. The solid yellow line is where we have ongoing projects. The United States on the East Coast, Gulf of Mexico, Belize, and portions of Mexico, Yucatan Peninsula, Bahamas, and then we also have some collaborations ongoing in Cuba and Costa Rica. So, data challenges. We've talked a lot about data limitations. So I'm going to propose two different definitions which are very helpful for us. The first are data-limited fisheries. That's where you have some information, and your agencies might have the capacity to eventually get enough information to do stock assessments. There's some talks earlier this week. Kieran gave, for example, where he was able to get information to feed stock assessments. Our fisheries, the flats fisheries, instead are data poor. There's not enough information to do a stock assessment, and the future holds no likelihood of getting that information. So we have to take a completely different approach. So a lot of our approach is based on terrestrial conservation, spatial habitat. Our view is that at the foundation, if you make sure the system, the habitats the fish depend upon are in good shape, you have that connected habitat mosaic, then you're good. And then you start working up on the other types of threats that you might have to the fishery, say capacity issues. At our core is collaboration, and I'm glad Steve talked about co-production. We're founded by anglers. The fishing community is part of what we do at every level, from identification of problems to policy applications, and it was great he gave that example about permit. When you have good collaboration, everyone's invested, and it's not just the fishing community. Our collaborators are the other researchers, but also the resource management agencies. So everything that we do and we fund, we know what the management applications are going to be. Even though I can kind of geek out on the science, we don't do science just because it's cool and it might apply. All the science we do has applications. And we also work on alternative assessment methods. Ben and Jen gave some great talks yesterday on that. As far as figuring out other ways to assess trends in the fishery. So we basically follow a three-step process. The first, and again, this is all collaborative, is to assess the status of knowledge and conservation threats for the species. And this is location-specific. You can't just do this once for the entire region. Different assessment for Belize and for Mexico and for Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, et cetera. So I'll share a matrix. We basically set this up in a matrix system. I'll share what we're working on for tarpon in the Gulf of Mexico and southeast U.S. Working on this with Luke Griffin and Joellen Wilson. Essentially, we work with our collaborators, experts, et cetera. You can see the color codes there, our status of knowledge from data deficient to what we call actionable knowledge for each of the different life stages in this particular portion of the framework. We assess the threat level to those different life stages, and between those and other inputs, we assign a priority. And we use those priorities to guide our funding. We obviously are always limited with money. So if we have, let's say, X amount of dollars, we can do priority 1, we get Y amount of dollars, we 2, and then on up. The other thing is that this is an iterative process. It's not static. So as we learn more, those priorities are going to change. So if we learn everything we need to know and address the habitat or the juvenile habitat issues, that goes down to a 5, and then we can reorder. This is, it's a big one, but we categorize into different sections. Biology, I just showed you. Fishery issues, conservation, and management. The other thing is that this, again, isn't set in stone. You're going to have local nuances. So some of the subcategories are going to change. Some places that I've heard many talks are going to have higher priorities over here on the management side. Others maybe in the cultural side with fisheries and user conflict types of things. So it's very, so the second is to actually conduct the high priority scientific work. On the 2 on the left, it's working with fishing guides in the Bahamas to identify and track bonefish spawning aggregations. Just for scale, you can see 2 people snorkeling there for the size of that bonefish aggregation. We do a lot of work on juvenile, those are juvenile permit, on juvenile habitat identification. In our portion of the world, coastal development. In Florida, it's already occurred, and it's been pretty dramatic. In other places like Belize, it is beginning to occur, and it's becoming very problematic. Victor Show gave a talk about that to some extent. And then a lot of work in recent years on tarpon migrations, because there's interjurisdictional management issues we need to address. The third part of the process is the actionable knowledge. And as I mentioned, knowing where this is going is kind of at the core. But the actionable knowledge means that you actually are putting it into action. And as Ross questioned Steve this morning, we have to be comfortable with a certain amount of uncertainty. And that's our biggest challenge in working with our resource managers. As Steve said, they don't like uncertainty, but they're getting a lot better at it because they see all the other things that are affecting the fisheries outside of stock assessments. So I'll give you 2 examples. Juvenile tarpon require mangrove wetlands. This is a picture in southwest Florida where I live of 1951. The same spot now. So you can see all the mangrove creeks and what? Almost all of them are gone. We've already lost 50% of our mangroves in Florida, so we're at a deficit. So even if we stopped all harvest or killing of tarpon with, say, post-release mortality, we'll never have the population we did 150 years ago because we don't have the juvenile habitat. So that informs working with land use planners. This is a town in southwest Florida. We can see what's already been developed. They have different sections in their zoning plan, so we're now applying the information on juvenile tarpon habitats to their zoning matrix. And so we can say, okay, we've got really good quality juvenile tarpon habitats in these 2 parcels. Let's shift development away from those parcels into ones that are already damaged, right? So trying to change how development happens in this world. Different place in Belize. Victor talked about this yesterday. On the far left, we first assess the habitats. You can see the different circles in different colors. Those are places that fishing guides have identified as top spots for fishing for the different species. We also, it's tough to see on this slide with the light, but there's some red lines showing where juvenile permit habitats have been identified. We can also identify, working with the fishermen, where permit spawn, work on protections there. And then we can address the main causes of concern for conservation threats, which is dredging of the seafloor. Putting all that together and working with Victor at Coastal Zone Management, they're creating a marine spatial plan that takes this into account as far as marine protections. When we look at, and even in established fisheries, but especially in new fisheries, making sure the species are suitable for a catch and release fishery is pretty huge. The assumption is that they all swim away, which we know is not true. So high post-release survival is huge. Sublethal effects are really important. But to be honest, in all the priority matrix, they're going to be pretty down because bang for the buck is pretty low on return, unfortunately. So the research that's been done on permit and post-release survival is very high, so with one exception. I'll mention that in a minute. Andy, Steve, and numerous others have done a lot of work on bonefish post-release survival. It mostly comes down to angler behavior and handling practices, so high post-release survival in general is good. A lot on education, keep fish wet, Bonefish Tarpon Trust. We also have education campaigns on that to try and change fisher behavior. Tarpon, that check mark is blue because there has been a study, but we need more. Kathy did some great work, but it's really tough to do a study on a 120-pound fish, post-release survival. So we're circling back on that, but what we do have, we can put into education campaigns as well, which is pretty huge. The life history susceptibility is also very important. Spawning aggregations are very vulnerable. We know that for bonefish, if the fish are caught, if they're released, there's a large number of sharks in the area, and survival post-release is pretty much zero. So we advocate, and we're pushing some regulations to basically make those areas not fishable when the aggregations are present. With permit, in areas where they're aggregating the spawn, depredation rates can be as high as 30–40%, and so we have some protected areas for spawning as well. So those are the types of things that have to be considered. Spawning migrations can also be a source of vulnerability, and then I already kind of mentioned juvenile habitats with tarpon. It's not fisheries related per se, but if you lose your juvenile habitats, the kind of rest of the fisheries kind of kaput. A lot of different socioeconomic factors as well, and I'm not going to obviously be able to go through everything in the framework. A big thing that we focus on is what we call fishery capacity. In a catch and release fishery, this is our definition. Basically, you want to still be able to have a high quality fishery. Even if you go to a spot, you see thousands of bonefish, if they've received a lot of fishing pressure, they will not eat a lure. That's not a good quality fishery, and the fishermen will go elsewhere. And there are numerous examples of that. So on the left, if you're not familiar with the flats fishery, it's called a sight fishery. You're either pulling a shallow water skiff or wading across the flat. You're sighting the fish and you're casting to that fish. It's not kind of a blind casting type of thing, so you need space. Something like this is not going to work for very long in the type of fishery we're talking about. And every fishery has different characteristics on space needs, capacity. So colleagues, Bonefish Tarpon Trust, Adiel Perez, and a colleague in Mexico recently did a study on figuring out what is fishery capacity for a fishery in Mexico. And basically it's about space. The number of boats, minimum boat distance and number of boats, the guides basically said, I want about 1,000 meters between me and the closest boat. And so you can see the number of boats that would be suitable for this fishery based on the space they have. You put it into map form. You can see at the top, reduced angler quality, moderate, and then optimal angler quality. And this is important for the fishery because if anglers go there and they're not having a good time, they're not going to go back. And Warren talked a good bit about yesterday about the importance of tourism-related fisheries versus local fisheries. And this is, in this instance, it's purely about tourism-related from within the country and elsewhere. So there's a lot of other factors that I'll just kind of breeze over in case of time. The fishery assessment, which I've already talked about, we're also working on an epigenetics clock, so we don't have to kill the fish in the future, just take a fin clip and determine age. You can look at age structure. Economics is also important. Just to give you an idea of the value, Bahamas, 169 million a year, the Keys, 465 million a year, and this is also thousands of jobs. So that gives us the leverage that I talked about earlier. A lot of cultural issues in some places. Catch and release is not culturally acceptable. And so that's something that has to be considered going in. In other places it is acceptable, but there can be user conflicts that are already existing or coming over time. Is the infrastructure suitable? Education, we put a lot into education in the school systems. In Belize on the left and here on the right, we actually have lesson plans that are acceptable in the schools so that it's actually building up culturally, not from the external tourists, but from the internal culture, the value of the fishery and habitats. And then finally in there with compliance, again, you can't enforce your way through recreational fisheries. You have to have compliance, and that comes from the investment from the beginning, as I said. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. We've got about a minute for questions. We can take a couple.
Yeah, great talk, Aaron. Can you expand a bit more about the user group conflicts?
It's all location specific. In Belize, I think Victor talked about it some. The big conflict right now in the Keys as well is jet skis. So a new form of I guess they're calling it ecotourism, is jet ski rentals. And when you're on the flats and you're pulling after fish and 5 people come through on a jet ski, that's the end of the day. So that's kind of the growing one right now, the tourism-related industry.
Okay, thank you.
Time for one more.
Yeah.
So, are the juvenile, how different are the juvenile habitats from the adult habitats? So if the juveniles are using mangroves?
Great question. The juveniles are depending on mangroves. The adults are coastal migratory, so they'll go 1,000 kilometers up the coast. They're not pelagic migratory, they're coastal migratory. So the ontogenetic life stages of tarpon go from wetland to ocean, essentially. Yeah. Good.
Thanks again, Aaron.